Welcome to Jammin' with Jason Mefford, a show where we discuss topics relevant to chief audit executives and professionals in audit, risk, and compliance. We discuss the technical and soft skills needed to navigate the minefields of organizations. You hear best practices and practical advice for helping you advance your career, and we'll even talk about music, mindfulness, and psychology, because we can. So sit back and relax while you listen to the #1 podcast in the world for internal auditors, unscripted and unedited. Hey everybody, I have a special treat today. I know I had to throw in 4 of those there, but I have my friend Toby DeRoche with me, and Toby heads up InsightCPE. And we're just going to get in and start talking about some stuff that I know a lot of you, as we were talking beforehand, Toby and I get asked a lot of the same questions. So we're going to try to answer some of those. So Toby, welcome aboard. Maybe spend just a minute or so and give a little background on yourself so people get to know you a little bit better too.
Sure, yeah. So my background's all internal audit. I was an internal audit with Macy's at their corporate headquarters. As an audit manager for about 4 or 5 years before I went into consulting. And I went into consulting with Teammate through Wolters Kluwer and was there for just over 10 years. And recently went off on my own. So that way I can do things that are more applicable just to the industry in general. Really wanted to focus on education and working with the entire audit profession, not just with people who are looking at software, because that's kind of a niche piece of it, the whole thing. But I really wanted to be able to influence where all of my peers are going, mostly because I keep hearing a lot of this, like you said, the same questions over and over again, and really just want to help them address all those same questions.
Yeah. Well, and so again, what are some of the questions you're hearing? And then let's just kind of dive in and actually give people some practical things that they can take away.
Yeah, and that's really it. The questions that I'm hearing, no matter what the topic is that's great, but how do I do it? Mm-hmm. We talk about how we need to make a transition to being an agile audit department, how we need to start working with the other lines of defense, how we're going to, work within this new reality of not everybody can go in the office. I can't travel. What am I going to do? How am I going to count inventory if I can't travel? We keep hearing these same questions over and over again. And when you look for guidance, you usually get something very theoretical. Mm-hmm. If you pick up a book on agile auditing, it's going to give you the history of agile processes, take you back to software. And it just shows a bunch of stuff on you that you're not going to use. And we need to be a lot more practical about the way that we're going to use these things, Like for something like agile, we can follow a pretty straight method that's going to get you there without having to take all these crazy paths down reporting you're probably not going to use.
Well, and I think that's an important thing. I mean, I've talked a lot about kind of the whole learning process. And I think this is where, because you and I are on the same page exactly on this, of trying to help people get something that's much more practical, right? But we've been trained in training that we acquire knowledge and skills. Yep, we do. And we get that through training. But that's just the first 2 of the 4 steps in the learning process. You have to figure out how to apply those knowledge and skills and then actually experience it for you to really learn it. And like you said, I think that's where, most people help provide knowledge. Like you said, they'll give you the theoretical knowledge. They'll explain the history of Agile. Big whoop-de-doo shit, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're like, but how do I apply it to me? And there's not really very many people that are actually helping people learn how to apply it, right, into what they're doing, right? Because again, it's like you learn about Agile. Okay, great. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm probably going to do things a little bit faster, right? I always hear people say that. Well, I got to do things faster, right? No, that's not what Agile means, right? No, that's not what it is. So how do we? I mean, I know you kind of left and started on your own to try to help people with that. How, maybe let's talk about a couple of these things that people are struggling with. Mm-hmm. And come up with some practical solutions that people can walk away with.
Yeah. So the Agile conversation is probably one of the ones that's top of mind for most people, mm-hmm. because for every single person out there, when we got to January, we threw the audit plan away and tried to figure out where to go.
Yeah.
And so,
and if it wasn't January, at least by March you threw
it was
out,
by
or
March.
hopefully you did, right?
Yeah. It was, and if you haven't, please do it now. It's so it's something that a lot of people were thinking about. Of I have to figure out how I can adjust my audit plan really quickly and focus on something that I had no idea was coming. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, I have to shift around and start thinking about logistics, and I have to start thinking about, does my business continuity plan include work from home? And then how do I come back? How do I get people back into the office? Do I get people back into the office? Do we scrap everything and just go completely remote all the time? And audit has a conversation here. Like, we're part of this. We're not just one of the, corporate victims of whatever's going to happen. So we have to have a say in everything. And that's going to get reflected in our audit plan. So if we're doing something like an agile plan, the whole idea would be, I'm only looking at the risks that are relevant right now, the ones that are the biggest, most important to leadership in the organization and to all the stakeholders. And so if I'm taking an actual strategic risk-based approach, I'm not looking at every single process in the entire organization. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the strategic risks and working my way down. And then I'm going to carve out, here's what I actually can get done in the next 3 months. And if I'm looking past 3 or 6 months, I'm looking too far, because we just proved that within 2 or 3 months, the world can change. So there's really no point in going any further than that. And then one of the things that I think is a really practical approach to all of this is, you don't start thinking about just, okay, how do I get stuff done faster? It's, how do I break it down into its component pieces, and then make sure that each of those pieces are happening in a very timely fashion, like within whatever parameters I have to work with, right? So if I've got 6 weeks to get an audit done, I can't afford scope creep anymore. I can't afford for these things to drag on forever, and I can't wait until the very end to start reviewing and then take it right back to the beginning to deal with the issue I found at the beginning of the audit. So we're breaking the audit down to pieces and then getting through each of those pieces as a team. And it's a shift in the way that we typically think about how we would assign work out, right? Because now it's, I'm going to go look at XYZ process, break that down into a couple of sub processes, and you go take one, I'm going to send somebody else on the next, and then I talk to you in 2 months.
That's not an agile approach.
No. And so now what we do is we say, so I'm breaking it down by risks. Now there's 3 of us on this team. We're all going to jump on risk number 1, and we're going to knock it out. When that one's done, we move to risk 2. We knock it out. And we keep ourselves accountable that way, because you might be doing the work. I might be helping you with some of the different procedures and tests and things. And then someone else is coming behind and doing the review right on our heels to make sure everything is good. Because let's say I've got 6 weeks. By the end of week 1 or 2, I need a report out the door.
Yep. And
the point of Agile was supposed to be, if we go back to the history of Agile, it was supposed to be that you had deliverable software at the end of a cycle. Mm-hmm. And so now we're basically saying my deliverable product is the report. And that report is done at the end of each cycle. So at the end of each week, I need to have a report out the door. When I get done with that audit, I'm done. Mm-hmm. Because management's seen the report since day one. I have nothing, there's nothing left for people to review. There's nothing left for us to deal with. And then that rolls up, because that was the audit. And then that rolls up to the quarter, which rolls up to the plan. And it's keeping everything moving in this way, where I'm looking at things on a 3-month horizon, and I'm churning out work in a way that I know it's staying on track. And I've got my deliverable of the report coming out at the end of every week.
Excuse me. Well, and I think that's, to me, that's one. Here's a practical thing for you folks, right? Is that, but it's seismic in shift in our thinking. Because historically, we go out, we work 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks on an audit. We spend 2 weeks preparing an audit report. Boom, at the end of that time, we issue our final report. Mm-hmm. And instead, using an agile approach, you're effectively writing your report or mini reports all along the way, mm-hmm. right? Now, that's a big difference for a lot of people, right? Which means, again, that goes back to how we're scheduling people. Yeah. It's the whole other idea of focusing on the biggest thing first. Mm-hmm. We don't get distracted. we are focused on one key objective in each one of these sprints. And when we get that done, we move on to the next thing. Yep. And that actually, because it reminds me of some different stories and other stuff around project management, that, really one of the reasons why we're so inefficient is we usually have too many things on our list to do.
Yeah.
And we get scattered. We end up working a little bit on this thing, then we switch gears, we move over to something else. And you're much more effective and efficient when you just knock out that one thing, right? You knock it out, then you move on to the next thing. And at the end of the day, that's more like the true risk-based approach. I've started trying to use that term. I don't know if it's going to catch on or not, but there's a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, I'm doing risk-based auditing, until you ask them a couple of questions, and then it's like, oh, maybe I'm not. Right?
You're doing entity-based auditing.
You're doing entity or process-based auditing. You're not doing risk-based auditing, right?
No. And so one of the things that I think is another big shift in this whole thinking process, especially around Agile, is the standards never actually said you had to write a report.
It says you have to communicate.
You have to communicate results. That's it. And so whenever you start looking at it as, let's use the standards for what they say. Let's not add anything to them, because we're adding work to ourselves that was never there.
Got a couple of examples of that. Yeah.
What we can actually take from an Agile process is this concept of a retrospective. So the retrospective is what you're doing. It's supposed to be like an internal thing at the end of every one of these sprints, where you basically say what worked and what didn't. What I'm really suggesting with this whole Agile thing is we take that retrospective and we flip it and use it in place of a report. Mm-hmm. And so what we can do is they're very, very standardized processes where you've got 4 steps and you're laying out, here's what we did last week. Here's what we did this week. Here's what went well. Here's what didn't. Here's what did go well. That's the issues you found. The point of the retrospective is you're doing this with management. So you've got them in the room with you. This is you presenting to them at the end of the week. Forget the idea of having a written report. You don't need it. You just communicated your results of the audit right there in person. And I want to get a response on the issues in this meeting. And you put a time limit on it. We've got 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. So here's what we did. Here's what went well. Here's where we had some problems that we found. What are you going to do about it? Let's document it right now. Let's document it on the board. Let's do this together. I don't know if you've ever used Trello.
I have, yeah.
I love Trello. It keeps my entire life on track right now. It's like it was built for this, though. And you can actually...
Well, it is. It's for project management.
It's for project management. A lot of Agile people use it. It's free, which is wonderful. Like, you can go spend more money and get something like Jira, and you might have that in your organization already, but Trello's free. Anybody can have an account. You go sign up and you can show how you can actually take that little 4-step process, project it on a wall in a meeting, type out the answers with everybody watching, and you're done. You didn't need to have a report. You didn't have to wait till the end of the audit to start tracking things. You've got what they're going to fix. You've got dates. We all committed to things in that quick meeting. Release those things out for people to start dealing with them. Be done with it. And you basically then, when you're done with your audit, at the end of that 6 weeks, not only were we done with the work, we're done with talking about it. Because that last day, we had the last meeting with management and we walked off. We were done. And now they're dealing with whatever follow-up they have to do.
Well, that's why I think it's great. One of the webinars that you did a little while ago, I think, was titled No More Audit Reports.
Yep.
Right. And we have that course now on C-Risk Academy, for people to go back and listen to. But I'm sure, when a lot of people saw that title, they're like, what are you kidding? If we have to write a report because that's what the standards tell us we have to do. Right. And again, it's like, all right, folks, if you're saying that to yourself, just do a timeout here. Mm-hmm. Because just like Toby said, the standards say nothing about having to write a report. It says that we have to communicate our findings or the results of our audit. Well, writing a report is only one way to communicate it. And so again, you can still be, don't make the word communication mean audit report. You can communicate and add value to your organization without even writing a report. And in
Yeah.
fact, I think, most of the stats I've seen, 30 to 40% of audit time is wasted writing reports,
Oh yeah.
which is just stupid. You could get 30 to 40% more work done if you just quit writing the damn report.
Yeah. Well, I was talking with a group down in Texas a couple months back, and they were looking for a way to speed up some of their processes. And their biggest problem, their biggest time drain was the report, because everyone in the entire organization gets hung up on the words.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, in their case, give this entire backstory of, well, here's where the process started in 1930 all the way up until now. And, everybody and their brother and who touched it and why it looks like the way it does. Basically, like, I don't care. Nobody cares. And if we weren't spending so much time trying to, tone down these things to the point that they're meaningless and take all of the stuff out of it, just stick to the facts. Here's what happened. Follow the standards for this one. It's criteria, condition, cause, effect, write it out, be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's very hard to argue with just normal facts, despite, current political stuff. It's
fake news.
It's all fake. Fake audit report.
That should be a title for
a
new webinar.
Hold on.
We'll see if you come up with it first or if I do, but yeah, no.
But yeah, it doesn't need to be this long drawn out thing. Just here's what we found. Now, if we don't put it in print, if it's not going into an audit report and we're just actually dealing with what was found, does that actually make things better? Because now people aren't getting hung up on, well, we can't use that word because that's going to offend Betsy Sue, and we can't use this word because legal is going to have a problem with it. And, we can just get down to the point of, here's what we found, here's what you're going to do, let's go.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the point to where we need to get to is you just have to start doing it, right? A lot of people get hung up on the thinking. They'll read books and books and books and books and I don't know, go to different trainings or whatever on Agile. But, as an example, it's just, look, here's kind of the basics. Just try it, right? Just start implementing it. You're probably going to make some mistakes the first couple times you do it, but that's part of the normal learning process. But the quicker you can start implementing it, the quicker you can start doing it, then you can modify. But yeah, everybody that I've talked to that's actually gone through and really taken a true Agile approach has loved it. And the people in their organizations have loved it as well. And it takes way less time, to do it. But you have to let go of some of those limiting beliefs and things that you believe are true that are not about the standards or about what internal audit has to do.
Yeah.
Because honestly, internal auditing, it's 150 or 200, and we were joking before, it might even be 6,000 years old.
Yeah.
In the same old of what we've been doing. It doesn't work for most people anymore.
No. And that's the thing, like as a group, we haven't made a lot of changes. We're 30 years into trying to adopt data analytics.
Yeah.
And so we don't move fast, but this is something that we can take on. It's right now is the right time. And so what I'm doing, I've written up a bunch of advice with examples and screenshots out of things like Trello and put it into a book and put that on Amazon. I've carved out some of it. I'm going to be putting it into some of the webinars that I have coming up. I'm actually doing one that's going to be a full 2 hours on just how to transition from a traditional audit process into Agile. And the whole goal with this one isn't to say, well, here's what Agile is, and really, we might spend 5 minutes on that. But the point is, how do we transition? Because I guarantee you, no one cares about the history of Agile. And yet, every single conversation we start with, Agile auditing started with the manifesto from some IT guys who did some stuff, and no one cares.
Yeah, quit wasting your breath on some of the stuff that doesn't really matter. Just figure out, well, and I think that's why, people are asking these questions, but how do I do it, right? Because the problem is when you only have something theoretical, you can maybe kind of understand it theoretically or academically, but unless you know how to actually implement or start actually doing some steps, then you end up in this kind of mental loop where we start asking questions, why, right? And asking yourself why questions just makes you go crazy.
Yeah.
Because for every answer you get to a why question, it comes up with another why question. So, one of the practical things that I do when I'm coaching people is quit asking why questions, start asking what and how, right? So, what can I do to make my traditional approach more agile based? Okay, you're going to get an answer. Then go and try it. How can I improve this? How can I do this better? You'll end up with some idea. Go implement it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And don't overthink it, because when you overthink it, then you won't take action.
And for the people that I've seen who've tried this and it doesn't work, it's because they took that approach. They overthought the whole thing. They went and got a book on project management using Scrum, and and they started trying to apply every single thing that you would do in this IT environment. That includes things like, well, I have to have burn down charts, and I have to have all of these other things, and I have to show. And the moment you look at this, you should say, do I need this?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's great for somebody, but as auditors, we don't need this. And the beauty of this is we're adopting this process. We pick and choose whatever we want.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we're going to get, lose our audit certification if we suddenly go off and do something slightly different from some other methodology that we learned about. You use whatever of it works and just adopt it to yourselves and make it something that helps us work better.
Yeah, because if we get into that overthinking and believing that it's going to be perfect the first time we do it,
right,
we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So realize that, nothing's going to be perfect the first time. So just start, just try. Like you said, just take a piece or two of it, try it, start incorporating it. When you get that working well, then you go and you grab the other thing. Right.
Yeah.
But like you said, so much of the time we end up thinking, oh my gosh, there's 100 things I have to do. And then we feel like, well, I can't accomplish all 100 things. So then we just don't do anything.
Right.
And instead picking one or two, okay, let's work on those until we get them good. Now let's go get a couple more.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, you end up getting through all 100 of them.
Right.
But you've got to actually take action with it. Yeah. Yeah. So there's some practical stuff around, Agile, which a lot of people are talking about. Mm-hmm. Now, I know too, one of the questions that I keep getting a lot is around the whole virtual or remote working and some of the stuff like that, right? And you mentioned before about, well, how can we do this if we're, how can we physically count inventory if we can't be there? And it's like, well, first off, folks, if you're still physically counting inventory, that's probably not one of the things you should be doing. In fact, that's a carryover from an archaic audit standard for external auditors. That they must physically observe inventories at year end for financial statement audits. There's no requirement for that for internal auditors. And in fact, most of your inventory processes are probably working well enough with enough mitigating controls that we shouldn't be, messing around with inventory anyway.
No. I can tell you, after spending 4 years in retail audit, and every year you've got to go through, a week long of all-nighters.
Oh yeah, I've been there.
Watching people count, and even before that, I spent 8 years in retail. I was actually
doing the inventories yourself.
Yeah, I was a store manager at a smaller retailer that's now gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all night long you spend counting all this stuff piece by individual piece. But in reality, people were doing things like cycle counts and spot checks, and everything would have been fine anyway. Check the things that are strange and outstanding, look for exception reports. But outside of that, it was a waste of time. But thinking about like remote work, one of the things that, as a practical approach, I've been suggesting is that people make out a decision tree. So let's assume that at some point we're going to be able to go back and have some travel. Well, first, if you're working for a company, they're probably not going to be real big on the travel budgets that we used to have. Because we just made it 6 months without it. And so they're not going to just suddenly open up their wallets and say, okay, go spend. And we don't know what travel is going to look like. If we start having airlines collapse, tickets might go up a lot. So we're going to have to see how much we can even feasibly travel. Start making out a decision tree of, well, how big of a risk is this thing I'm looking at? If it's a high risk, let's assume that it would be better if I were on site, but maybe I don't need to be on site for the whole thing. Before, what we would do is from day one to day, finished, we were on site, and we would spend every waking moment, travel out on a Monday morning, come back on a Friday night, and you spent every minute on site. You didn't need to spend your planning time there. You probably didn't need to spend much time that first week or two because people were still gathering evidence for you. And they could have dropped that off somewhere in a shared drive and be done with it. You didn't have to go and sit and wait. You could probably had a bunch of Zoom conversations with people and done a lot of the due diligence before you ever set foot on site. And then if you had to go out there, then you go for what matters and you get that part knocked out and go back home. Okay. You don't need to be on site because it's not just the travel, it's the flight, the hotels, the disruption. They may not want you there because now we're introducing a new risk element to them by having outsiders walking around the building. Your people may not want to go. I personally would not want to go anywhere right now. So it's too much to ask people to start traveling more. And we have to find a way to get around it. And so one of the things that we can start to look for is, well, do I have any local resources that I could adopt? It's not a new thing for us. We've been using internal subject matter experts forever. And so if I've got somebody there that can do the work for me, great. They just got deputized. Now they're in audit. And use them to go do some of the legwork for you. You got to go and do an inventory observation. Yeah, everybody's got FaceTime on their phone. Turn it on and let them walk around the building. If it's something that's not a high risk audit, we probably never needed to go to begin with.
Yeah.
In those high risk times, though, it might be an on-site, it might be adopt a local resource, or that's where we start looking at things like, can I outsource? And it doesn't need to be a big contractual outsourcing engagement. We're talking, can I freelance this thing out? Can I grab some local resource who's willing to go out and spend a couple of days and do some legwork for me? And you can grab these guys off of things like Freelancer or Fiverr. But we just have to change our way of thinking.
We have to change our way of thinking. And even to kind of go back to the retail example that we were talking about before, right? I mean, when usually most large retailers, they don't do their own inventory count.
Nope.
Right. That's why I can't remember the name. There's like two big companies that do most of the stuff for the people in the US. Right. And so you show up and you observe or watch these people doing it. Well, again, if it's one of the biggest companies in the world that are doing this, their processes are probably pretty good. Right. So that could be an example of where you could probably outsource it. Yeah, you might have to do a little bit of work to verify that they actually know what they're doing, but not physically be there, right? And I love your idea about the decision tree, trying to come up with something and really starting to ask yourself the questions, do I have to physically be on site for this? Because that's what I've been talking about with a lot of people. There's probably creative ways. Like you said, FaceTime. I was joking with somebody the other day about using drones. But heck, we could use drones too, right? FedEx a drone to somebody at the facility and say, go set it out on the floor and turn it on. Yep. And then we're going to remote do it from whatever, right? I mean, if the military can fly drones all the way around the world from wherever they happen to be, then we could do things like that as well, right?
Yeah.
Or, get back to the point to where, hey, instead of being on site for 2 weeks, maybe we're only there for 1 or 2 days. Maybe that's really all we have to be on site. Because honestly, a lot of times on site work, there's a lot of downtime too.
You're sitting in an office.
You're waiting for somebody. 3 people on the team are trying to talk to the same person at the same time. And so there's a lot of
half our time figuring out lunch and dinner.
Where are we going to go to dinner tonight?
Exactly.
No, I don't want Mexican tonight. We had that 2 nights ago, whatever. Right. But, another one that kind of goes along with this though, that I know I've had a lot of people asking questions about, well, but how do we develop relationships? We have that old term auditing by walking about, where you're just kind of walking around and you notice certain things, or maybe you're new to an organization, you don't know somebody. How can we develop relationships with people remotely?
Mm-hmm.
Where before maybe we bumped into them at the coffee station, or, it's easier to maybe go have lunch with them or do something like that. How do we transition a lot of that stuff now to virtually?
Yep.
And I know a lot of people are kind of scared about that and thinking it can't be done. So I'm kind of interested to hear your take on that as well.
It's interesting. So I've actually worked from home for 10 years.
Uh-huh.
So this last few months has been everybody else joining the party because I've been
Oh,
doing this for a long time. And it's so funny to watch people struggle with these ideas. The reality is you're just having to be more intentional about it.
mhm.
So I have a series of people that I'm working with, and I might have in the course of a week, 2 or 3 conversations with each one, but it's cameras on, face to face.
Mhm.
It's not like you lose all human contact when you go to work from home. You just have to change the way you think about it. Um, I have a friend who he and I get together at least every other day, and it is literally just get on Zoom, we have a cup of coffee together and chat. And it's just so that we can catch up, and it's usually half work, half, home life, whatever's going on. But it's not that hard to keep those relationships going. And it would be the same thing. It may be a little awkward at first, especially if these aren't people you know that well. But you're going to go out, and we would have been doing an inventory. So we would have had lunch with the director of some facility in Jersey. Get them on the Skype, get them on a Zoom, have a conversation with them. Just block out 20 minutes. Don't make it a big thing, and just have the conversation, just chat. Be human.
Well, I think it's funny, because like you said, a lot of people are kind of freaking out about this.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, the medium has changed, but the principles have not.
Right.
Right. So like when you're talking with your friend, there's some rapport
Mm-hmm.
that you're building. You're talking about work stuff, but you're also talking about personal stuff. Why? Because that's part of developing a human relationship with
Right.
people, right? You can do that remotely just like you can in person. I mean, right now we're not together.
No.
You're halfway, or you're pretty much the whole way across the country from
Mm-hmm.
me, right? So we're probably 2,500 miles apart, but camera on, we can still have a real human connection. And I think, like you said, that actually the video options, with Skype or
Mm-hmm.
Zoom or Teams or whatever you're using, is much better than just a phone call.
Oh yeah.
Right. But in the past, folks, right, you think about it, it's like we wouldn't have thought it weird to pick up the phone and call somebody and talk to them over the phone, but actually video is a better medium anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, you're doing the same things, building rapport with them, developing those relationships, discussing what you need to, getting the stuff done. I think more than anything, actually, virtual, like you said, you've got to be more intentional about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can be much more efficient when it's virtual as well.
Yeah.
Right? Because now it's, you've scheduled a time with somebody, you're not interrupting them in the middle of something else. People
Mm-hmm.
know, they show up, you can be quick on and off, kind of thing as well.
Yeah. And a lot of the suggestions that I've been giving to people on this is think about the other person and yourself, and think about the schedule, right?
Hmm.
You don't want to block out an hour for every single meeting you're ever going to do.
Hmm.
You probably don't need half an hour either. Because before it would have been, you might have scheduled something, you sat across from them in a desk, took your notes, and then left when you were done.
Yep.
It's not like you stayed the half hour just because you had a half hour blocked. And for some reason, when we put things on a calendar and we do virtual, a lot of people get into this idea that I have to fill up the time. And it's okay because we've got these phrases of, well, I'm going to give you 5 minutes back in your day.
Hmm.
And it's when you're done, you're done. Just be done. And when we're being more intentional about it, you don't schedule things for half an hour. You schedule it for 20 minutes because they've got another meeting to get to. They might have back-to-back calls. Whatever it is that's going on, and you might have the same thing. You don't want these things running up against each other because now you didn't have any time to actually think, process, go get that cup of coffee that you really needed, whatever it might have been. So do things in shorter blocks. If it was going to be an hour, call it 45 minutes and be done.
Yeah.
And when you put things on someone's calendar like that, the piece of it is setting expectations and tell them up front, even put it in the invitation. It's 20 minutes to talk about this with cameras on, and let them know the cameras need to be on, because this is still part of your audit, right? I mean, it's the more informal part that we would have had from walking around, but you need to see them. You need the body language. You need the eye contact. You need to be able to see if they're getting really squirmy when you start talking about something, because maybe they've got something to hide.
They start touching their forehead and rubbing their nose and everything, all those
like,
little tail signs. Well, and I think that's, I've been, similar to you, I've been working from home for 8 years myself. And it's, the camera on is a big deal, and even when, depending on the call, but I won't really do certain calls unless people will turn on their camera.
Yeah.
And if they can't get their camera on, then it's like, okay, well, we're going to have to reschedule.
Yeah.
Right. Other times where, again, I might let them hide, but I never hide. I always have my camera turned on, except for one meeting that I have with one of my clients, because they don't have it on. It's a quick meeting kind of thing. But, have your camera on. Don't try to hide. And most of the time people will be like, oh, well, I look a mess today. And it's like, well, so do I. Look at me, right? Turn it on. I don't care. Because it gives you the better connection. And since only about 7% of the message is the words that are used, you need to see people, see how they're responding, see their intonation, their volume, everything else as well, but their body language too. So
this is something that's like a really personal thing for me. So I have a son who's 7 with autism.
Okay.
And he's verbal. He speaks, but his vocabulary is limited. His ability to have a conversation is limited. And you learn really quick that you can say a whole lot without opening your mouth.
Oh, yes.
He
says a whole bunch without opening his mouth, doesn't he? Yeah.
He's all nonverbal communication. He can look at you and you know exactly what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and so we need to incorporate that into what we're doing as well, right? So, and like usual, we kind of end up bumping up on time here, so we're gonna have to do a timeout and probably have you on later too. But it's hopefully for everybody that's listening, and as we've been talking, there's practical ways to start implementing some of these things, but you just got to get out of your way, quit overthinking it, try to take it in some small chunks, and realize that, everybody's running around saying, oh, the world is so different today than it's ever been. No, it's not. Actually, it's not, folks, right? We've gotten used to going to the store. Why? Because for the last, 60 or 80 years, we've been programmed to go to the store. But how did people in the U.S. get their bread and their milk and their eggs 100 years ago? Home delivery. It was just done by horse and carriage, right? Instead of Amazon trucks. So, a lot of the stuff isn't really that different. And there's ways when you start thinking about it, that you can, a lot of it's just keep doing the same thing. It's just with a different medium.
Yeah.
So anyway, any final thoughts that you want to leave with people? Because like I said, I appreciate what you're doing too, and trying to help people become much more practical and actually do stuff instead of getting hung up in the theoretical.
Yeah, I'd say like the way that I'm trying to get the message out, I'm doing webinars. I try to do them every third Thursday of the month. They're very practical. I try to keep it all, we don't talk theory. We're really getting down to how do we do things. Those are all on demand on C-Risk Academy.
Yep.
And I'm also doing these where they do get to be a little more technical. I'm actually putting them into a book format that I'm putting on Amazon. That way you can follow along with it if it's something more like, it really is a long drawn out process to go from, I need to move from traditional to agile. There's some steps in the middle. And it really does work better sometimes if you've got those as a reference to go back to. And so I'm putting those in print so people can have that as a takeaway as well.
Which is great. Yeah, because like you said, you can't get from that knowledge and skills area to the application or experience unless you have some kind of tools with that, or at a minimum, questions to answer or kind of thought exercises to go through to be able to make that application over. So,
because you really, like we've been talking about, you have to change the way you're thinking. And this is really to be a guide. It's to get you from A to B, so that now that you're looking at things differently and you're starting to apply it, trying to be as explicit with it as possible of here's how you do it. And you're going to have your own take on it, but now that you're thinking that way, you can make that leap.
Yeah. Well, and for everybody to just relax too, because like we talked about a couple times in our discussion, your organization doesn't have to do it the same way as somebody else. In fact, you shouldn't do it the same way as somebody else because your organization is different. And so, while, everybody always likes to hop on it's best practice to do this, it's best practice to do that. Quit worrying about best practice. Do what's most practical and valuable to your organization, regardless of what everybody else is doing. So, all right. Well, Toby, thank you. Like I said, so yeah, you mentioned, you're doing webinars the third Thursday of the month usually, and that's InsightCPE. So how can people find those webinars? We'll try to put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's on insightcpe.com/webinars.
Okay.
We post them all on LinkedIn as well. And then all of our on-demand, I have links to them on my page, and they're also there all on C-Risk Academy.
Yeah, so on there on C-Risk, you can even just search by Toby's name, and it'll filter out all of his courses as well, so that you can see it. Because there's some great ones out there, like No More Audit Reports. One that you just recently did too is about, what was it? Something about the fraud triangle. We need a new fraud triangle.
A new fraud triangle. A lot of the ones that I'm doing, it's really just taking some of these things, like fraud triangle has been around for 70 years. Like, it's really a different world out there that doesn't work anymore. And
the whole reason it was created was for law enforcement. Yes. And then it's just been kind of adopted by the fraud industry as well.
And the fraud industry, the way that it's been taken, it's purely financial.
Yeah.
It doesn't consider things like, well, what about hacking? And what about AI? Where does AI come into play? What happens if there was no motivation behind it other than I wanted to see if I could do it? It's not because of financial pressure.
Is the classic hacker.
That's the hacker.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not because I was under some financial pressure, but I wanted to see if I could hack the DoD.
And I did. No, I didn't. I did not. NSA.
I did not either.
I did not. Yeah. So anyway, go check out Toby's webinars, and like I said, if you can't catch them live, they're on C-Risk afterwards for you to be able to go back to as well. So, Toby, thanks, my brother. Let's keep up the fight, keep helping the profession, and help everybody be more practical, so that we can move forward into the future and not just become some other compliance activity in the organization.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you later on the next show. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy at ondemand.criskacademy.com. And that's C as in the letter C, riskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you also will have access to the video version of today's show. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.